Eli Whitfield didn't put Cody down when the boy stopped moving his legs. Didn't stop when June fell for the second time and came up bleeding at the knee and didn't make a sound about it. He kept walking. 13 years old, 60 pounds of his 6-year-old brother on his back through Montana, heat that hadn't broken in 2 months. Behind him, his mother had gone quiet. That scared him more than anything Burton Creed had ever done. Clara Whitfield could survive anything and talk through all of it. When she went silent, she was using every last thing she had just to stay on her feet. He didn't know yet that the man watching them from the ridge was about to become the only wall standing between his family and the man hunting them. If this story already has your heart in your throat, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single word. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Eli Whitfield knew the moment his mother wasn't going to make it to the fence on her own. He'd been watching her walk for the last hour, the way he watched weather, not looking directly, catching it at the edge of his vision, reading the small shifts that told you what was coming. The way her right hand had moved from her side to pressing flat against her ribs. The way each step had started to land just a half-second wrong, like her body was sending out the command and her legs were arguing back. He didn't say anything. He kept walking with Cody's arms locked around his neck, and Cody's weight settled across his back the way he'd been carrying it since before sunrise. 6 years old and dead weight now, not unconscious, just depleted the way a young child goes when they've pushed past everything they had. "Mama!" That was June 3 steps behind him, her voice very small. "Mama, you're walking sideways." "I'm fine." Clara's voice came back even. It was the same voice she used when she wasn't. Eli stopped. He turned around and looked at his mother. She was standing 3 steps back, and she was upright, but only just. Her hand had found a fence post she'd grabbed without realizing it, and her face was the color of something that had been left out too long in the heat. "Give me your arm," he said. "Eli." "Mama, give me your arm." She looked at him. He could see the argument forming and then dissolving behind her eyes the way it always dissolved when she ran out of strength to hold it together. She reached out, and he took her hand and put it through his arm, and they walked the last 50 yards like that. Cody on his back, his mother on his arm. June 3 steps behind with her chin up and her eyes straight ahead. Because that was June, she cried easy, but she held harder than anyone. He didn't see the man on horseback until they were at the fence. The horse was a big gray standing still, the way well-trained animals do. The man in the saddle was broad-shouldered, lean, with a hat pulled low, and the kind of stillness that wasn't laziness, it was attention. He had one hand resting on his thigh. The other was loose at his side, close to the holster, but not reaching for it. He was looking at them the way a man looks at something he hasn't decided about yet. Eli didn't flinch. He was too tired to flinch. "That's your fence," Eli said. "It is," the man said. "We need to come through it." The man looked at Cody, limp against Eli's back. He looked at Clara, pale and swaying at Eli's arm. He looked at June, who was staring back at him with the flat, direct gaze of a child who had learned to read adults fast and didn't much like what she usually found. "How long you been walking?" the man said. "Since before light." "Where from?" "South." "That woman sick?" "She's got a fever." Eli said it plain. "Started yesterday. She needs water, and she needs to sit down, and she needs a doctor if you've got one within 14 miles. The man swung down from the saddle in one motion. He was taller on the ground than he'd looked on the horse. He crossed to the fence, pulled the wire aside with a practiced hand, and held it open. "Come through," he said. Eli went first with Cody turned and helped Clara. She made it without taking the stranger's hand. She held Eli's arm and stepped through on her own, and Eli noticed the man didn't push it. June ducked through last, quick and quiet. The man let the fence fall back. "Samuel Cord," he said. "This is my land." "Eli Whitfield." He shifted Cody higher on his back. "This is my brother Cody and my sister June. That's my mama Clara." Samuel looked at him. Then he looked at Clara, who had pressed her palm flat to the fence post again and had her eyes closed. Then he did something Eli hadn't expected. He didn't reach for Clara. He reached for Cody. "Let me take him," Samuel said. Eli stepped back. "I've got him." "Son." Samuel's voice was quiet. No edge in it. "You've been carrying him since before light. I can see it in how you're standing. Let me take him the last 100 yards. Eli looked at him. He had learned to read men the way his mother had taught him, not by what they said, but by what they did when they thought nobody was watching. Samuel Cord had held that fence wire open with both hands, so none of them would catch their clothing on it. He'd spoken to Eli first, not to Clara. He'd reached for the boy, and not for anything else. Eli let him take Cody. Samuel carried the boy against his chest, with the ease of someone who'd done it before, and Eli walked beside him, and said nothing, and behind them, he could hear June speaking soft to Clara, and Clara answering. Still upright, still moving. The woman at the ranch house was named Agnes. Somewhere between 50 and 60 white hair pinned up tight forearms that had seen real work. She came through the door, before they reached the porch steps, took one look at Clara's face and said, "Pete, get out here," loud over her shoulder. And then she was at Clara's side, with a steadiness that made Eli exhale something he hadn't known he'd been holding. "Come on, honey," Agnes said to Clara. "Come on inside. Let's get you off your feet." "My children." "Your children are right behind you. I can count all 3 of them. You come on." A young man appeared from around the side of the house. Pete, apparently early 20s, quick on his feet. Hat pushed back on his head like he'd been working and hadn't thought about it. Samuel spoke to him without raising his voice. "Ride to Morrow Creek. Get Dr. Finch. Tell him I need him out here today, not tomorrow." "Yes, sir." Pete was already moving toward the barn. "If Finch isn't in, don't come back without someone." "Yes, sir." Inside, Agnes put Clara in the back bedroom and got her shoes off and her coat off and said something firm and low that Eli couldn't hear from the doorway. Cody was on a cot in the corner, awake now, and blinking, holding a biscuit that Agnes had pressed into his hand before anyone asked. June had sat herself down beside him, with her knees pulled to her chest, and was watching the doorway with that expression she had, taking inventory, deciding. Eli stood in the doorway and watched his mother settle back against a pillow that wasn't hers, and he thought, we made it this far. That's not the same as making it, but it's something. Agnes came out of the bedroom and nearly walked into him. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You eat anything today?" "No, ma'am." She pointed at the kitchen table. "Sit." He sat. She put bread in front of him and cold meat and a cup of water, and he drank the water in 3 swallows, and she refilled it without being asked. He ate the bread and didn't taste it. He was listening through the wall for his mother's breathing. Samuel came in from outside and poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. He didn't sit. He looked at Eli across the kitchen with the same measuring expression he'd used at the fence, and Eli looked back at him. "You going to tell me what you're running from?" Samuel said. "We're traveling," Eli said. Samuel nodded once, slow. "Traveling, with a sick mama and 3 children and no wagon and no supplies. In a drought year, south of the Morrow Creek Road." "Yes, sir." "All right." He said it like he was filing it away for later. He was quiet a moment. Then, "Someone following you." Eli's hands were flat on the table. He kept them flat. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you came across the south fence," Samuel said. "Not the road. The south fence is a long walk from the road. That's the route you take when you don't want to be seen." Eli looked at the table. He was 13 years old and tired in a way that went down to the bone, and this man had laid out the truth in 2 sentences without pressure or judgment, and just left it there between them. "There might be riders," Eli said, "coming up from the south, maybe a day behind." Samuel set his coffee cup down. "How many?" 2, maybe 3. "Riding for who?" Eli said the name the way you set down something heavy you've been carrying too long. Burton Creed, out of Billings. Something moved through Samuel Cord's face. Not recognition exactly. Something closer to the expression a man gets when he hears a sound he wasn't expecting and is deciding what it means. "Tell me about him," Samuel said. "He married my mama 2 years ago." Eli kept his voice even. "Before that cattle broker, he knew everybody in Billings. Money manners, the kind of man who looks one way in public and is another way behind closed doors." He stopped. Mama didn't know for a while, neither did I. "What did she find out?" Eli was quiet for a moment. "There's a ledger," he said. "Whose?" "His." He looked up at Samuel. "He kept it hidden. Mama found it 8 months ago when she was looking for the deed to my real daddy's land. She thought Creed had put it in the strongbox. The deed wasn't there. This ledger was." He paused. "She didn't tell me everything that was in it. She told me it was bad. That same night she said we were leaving and we needed to be quiet about it." "How long after that did you leave?" 6 weeks. Samuel let that sit. 6 weeks from Billings. You had a wagon. "Wheel broke yesterday. Left it on the creek road about 4 miles back." Eli's jaw tightened. "Mama had the fever since the morning before. She told me to take June and Cody and walk north. Said she'd wait in the wagon." He paused. "I didn't leave her." Samuel looked at him steadily. "I know you didn't." He picked up his hat from the table and turned it in his hands. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to think before you answer." "All right." "Does Creed know your mama saw that ledger?" The silence stretched out thin. "Yes," Eli said. "He figured it out the same night she found it. She wasn't careful enough going back, and he saw it in her face." He stopped. His hands pressed harder on the table. "He told her that ledger didn't exist, and neither did she if she ever made it anyone else's problem." The kitchen held that for a moment. Samuel put his hat on. He went to the door, opened it. "Agnes?" he called toward the back of the house. "I'm going to the south fence, back before dark." Agnes's voice came back flat and clear. "Don't be later than that." He turned to Eli one last time. "Don't go anywhere. Don't open that front door to anyone but me or Pete." "Where are you going?" Eli said. "To get your wagon." Eli stood up. "Mr. Cord, you don't have to—" "Sit down," Samuel said. "Eat the rest of that bread." He was through the door before Eli could say another word. Eli sat back down. He looked at the door for a moment. Then he said quietly to the empty kitchen, "All right then." June appeared in the doorway. She'd left Cody with Agnes. She crossed to the table and sat across from him and looked at him with those flat measuring eyes that didn't miss much. "Is he coming back?" she said. "Samuel, he'll be back before dark." "Not Samuel." June shook her head once. "Burton." Eli looked at his sister. 8 years old. She'd asked the question no one else had said out loud yet. "Probably," he said. June nodded like she'd already known the answer and just needed it confirmed. "Samuel went to get the wagon," she said. "He did." "Why?" Eli didn't have a clean answer. He said, "I'm not entirely sure yet." June thought about it. "Because he's good," she said. Not a question. A conclusion she'd already made. Eli said nothing. He wasn't ready to land there. He'd learned what happened when you decided someone was good before the evidence was in. Cody appeared behind June, trailing a blanket still holding half a biscuit. "Eli," he said, "there's a gray horse outside. Can I go see the gray horse?" "Not right now." "Why not?" "Because I said not right now?" Cody considered this. "Agnes says we can stay for supper." "Agnes isn't the one deciding that." "Who is?" Eli looked at the window. "We'll see," he said. Night came in hot and slow. Dr. Finch arrived 2 hours behind Pete, a dry, efficient man who went into the back bedroom and came out 20 minutes later and told Eli in the same tone he'd probably used 1,000 times that the fever was high, but not the highest he'd seen, and that Clara needed water, rest, and time, and if the fever broke in the next 24 hours, she'd be fine. "What are the chances?" Eli said. Finch looked at him the way adults look at children who ask straight questions in the wrong rooms, deciding whether to give a real answer. "She's strong," Finch said. "Keep someone with her tonight." Agnes took the first watch. Eli took the second. He sat in the chair beside his mother's bed with the lamp turned low, and he listened to her breathe, and he counted the breaths, the way he'd counted his own footsteps on the road. 1. And 1. And 1. Still here. Still going. Clara woke around midnight, not fully surfacing through the fever, like something coming up from deep water. Eyes open, but not all the way present. "Eli." Rough voice. "Right here, Mama." The children. Asleep. Both of them. They're fine. She found his hand on the blanket. Too hot. "Whose house?" she said. "Man named Samuel Cord. Found us at the south fence. He bring us in." "He did." She was quiet. Her fingers stayed around his. What kind of man? Eli thought about the wire held open, the way Samuel had taken Cody without asking twice, the way he'd ridden south alone in the dark for a broken wagon that didn't belong to him. "Jury's still out," Eli said. A sound came from her, almost a laugh. "Good answer." Her eyes were already closing. "Don't trust fast, Eli." "I know, Mama." "Not anyone. Not even the good-looking ones." "Yes, ma'am." "Wake me if it gets worse." "It's not going to get worse." "Wake me if it does." Her grip loosened as sleep pulled her back down. He stayed until her breathing slowed and evened out. Then he went to the kitchen. Samuel was already there. He was at the table with the lamp and a piece of paper, and he looked up when Eli came in with no more surprise than if he'd been expecting him. He nodded at the chair across the table. Eli sat. Samuel pushed a cup of coffee toward him. Eli took it. "She wake up," Samuel said. "Briefly, she's back under." Samuel nodded. He looked at the paper in front of him. Eli could see it was a hand-drawn map, done from memory. The creek road, the ridge line, the wash, south of the property. "You drew that tonight?" Eli said, thinking through how he comes at us. Samuel turned the paper so Eli could see it. "Man with 2 or 3 riders from the south. He won't come on the main road. He knows that's where someone would be watching. Where does he stop first, and where does he come in from?" Eli leaned over the map. His finger found the dry creek bed without hesitation. "Here. Waters the horses, gets his bearings. Then he cuts east through the wash and comes up behind the ridge." He looked up. "He doesn't walk into things he can see." Samuel studied him. "You've thought about this before." "Every night since Billings," Eli said. "Every route he could take. Every place he might be waiting when we weren't looking." Samuel folded the map and put it in his shirt pocket. He was quiet a moment. "Tell me what he's capable of," he said. Eli told him. He told him about the sheriff in Billings who looked the other way when Creed needed it. About the land dispute 2 years back where the other party had simply stopped appearing in court. About the men who rode for Creed who weren't ranch hands by any honest measure. Samuel listened without interrupting. When Eli finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "He's patient," Eli said. "He doesn't get angry and do stupid things. He thinks, and then he moves, and by the time he moves, he's already figured out where the exits are." "Is he violent?" Samuel said. Eli thought about the night in Billings, the conversation through the bedroom wall, his mother's face in the morning. "When he decides he needs to be," he said. Samuel nodded slowly. He set his coffee down. "Your mother bring the ledger with her," he said, "when you left." Eli was quiet. He thought about his mother's coat, the way she'd worn it through the heat of the last 2 days without taking it off. The way her right hand kept going to the inside pocket every hour or so, just to check, just a reflex, the way you touch something you're terrified of losing. "I think so," he said. "You think or you know." Eli got up from the table. "Wait here," he said. He went to the back bedroom, moved carefully in the dark. Clara was breathing slow. Her coat hung on the hook behind the door where Agnes had put it. Eli reached into the inside pocket. His fingers found it. Small, leather-bound, worn at the corners. He brought it back to the kitchen and set it on the table in front of Samuel Cord. Samuel looked at it. He looked at Eli. He opened it. The lamplight fell across the pages. Samuel read in silence. He turned 3 pages. His face, which had been careful and controlled all evening, went through something not shock, something that sat lower than shock and burned slower and longer. He stopped on 1 page. He read it twice. "You know these names," Eli said. Samuel closed the ledger. "Some of them," he said. "How bad is it?" Samuel looked at him across the table. "Bad enough that Creed's not riding up here because he's angry," he said quietly. "He's riding up here because this," he put one hand flat on the cover, "is the only thing keeping him from being untouchable. He needs it back, or he needs to make sure that anyone who's seen it isn't left standing to say what's in it." The words landed in the kitchen the way hard truths land, without softening, without room to argue. Eli held them. He'd known it more or less. But hearing it said straight out by a man who wasn't trying to spare him, that was its own thing. "What do we do with it?" Eli said. Samuel picked up the ledger and put it in his breast pocket and buttoned the pocket closed. He looked at Eli. "Nobody knows your mama has this. Not Creed, not his riders. She carried it 6 weeks and they haven't found it." "He knows she took something," Eli said. "He doesn't know exactly what." "Good. Then he doesn't know what we're holding." Samuel's voice was level. "That changes things considerably." Eli looked at the pocket where the ledger had disappeared. "You're going to help us," he said, not quite a question, not quite a statement. The thing between them when you're still deciding whether to believe something. Samuel Cord looked at him across the lamplit table. He was a man who had drawn a map in the dark for strangers, who had ridden south alone for a broken wagon, who had held a wire fence open with both hands so a family he'd never met wouldn't catch their clothing on it. "Already am," he said. He stood up and picked up the lamp. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow I need everything you remember about those names. Every detail, all of it. The more Finch gives us reason to hope in the morning, the faster we move." He paused at the doorway. "Your mother's strong, Eli. I saw it in how she walked through that fence. She's going to be all right." "And if the fever doesn't break," Eli said. Samuel looked back at him. "It will," he said, and there was no performance in it, just the plain, flat certainty of a man stating what he'd already decided was true. He went down the hall, and Eli sat alone at the kitchen table with empty hands and something in his chest that felt for the first time in 6 weeks, like a weight shifted, not lifted, not gone, but held in more than one place. He thought about the ledger in Samuel Cord's breast pocket. He thought about Burton Creed, somewhere south of the Ridge patient, and sideways moving, taking his time, because he'd always had time, and had never yet found a reason to hurry. He thought about his mother breathing on the other side of the wall. He thought about June saying, "Because he's good." The way she said things she'd already decided were settled. Eli pressed his hands flat on the table and breathed in and breathed out. He wasn't ready to call it settled. He was 13 years old, and he'd learned the hard way that things that looked solid had a way of coming apart in the dark. He'd believed in the wrong thing once, not him, his mother, and he'd watched what the cost of that was. But the man had taken the ledger and said, "Already am." And in this kitchen, in this house that wasn't his, with his brother asleep and his sister asleep, and his mother breathing steady on the other side of a wall for tonight, that was enough to close his eyes on. He blew out the lamp and lay down on the cot Agnes had set up in the corner of the front room. And in the dark, He told himself the same thing he'd been telling himself since Billings. One more day. Just keep going. One more day. Only this time, for the first time, it didn't feel like desperation. It felt like the beginning of something. Eli woke to the sound of Agnes moving in the kitchen and the particular quality of early light that meant it was just past 5 and the heat had already started. He lay still for a moment listening. Cody was breathing beside him. June's cot was empty. She was already up, which meant she'd been watching the road. He found her on the porch, sitting on the top step with her arms around her knees, looking south. "Anything," he said. "Nothing yet," she said. But Pete checked the south fence at first light. He looked like he found something. Eli looked at her. "You saw his face when he came back." "I see everybody's face," June said. He couldn't argue with that. Agnes had coffee on and biscuits in the pan when he came back inside. She handed him a cup without looking at him, which was already starting to feel like her way of saying she'd accepted his presence. He took it and stood at the window and watched the yard. Samuel came in from the barn 10 minutes later, Pete behind him. Samuel's face was doing that thing it did, controlled on the surface, working underneath. He looked at Eli across the kitchen. Then he looked at Pete and said, "Go check on the Gray's left foreleg. She was favoring it yesterday." Pete went back out. Samuel poured coffee and sat down across from Eli and put both hands flat on the table. "He's closer than a day," Samuel said. Eli's hands went still around his cup. "How close?" Pete found fresh tracks at the South Creek crossing. 2 horses moving fast, staying off the main line. Samuel looked at the table. "That was sometime last night." "He ran them through the night," Eli said. "Which means he's not being careful anymore. He's moving to get here before something changes." Samuel looked up. "Before your mama can get in front of anyone who matters." Eli set his cup down. "He knows about the ledger. He knows she took something. He may not know exactly what, but he knows enough to ride through the night for it." "Who does he know in Morrow Creek?" Eli said. Samuel was quiet a moment. "Sheriff Hale owes him a favor from a land deal 2 years back. Judge Perkins is a fair man, but Creed has crossed his path more than once." He paused. "Frank Alderman, the lawyer, doesn't owe Creed anything. I know that for certain." "Can we get to Alderman before Creed does?" "I sent Pete last night," Samuel said, "before he checked the fence." Eli looked at him. He hadn't heard Pete ride out, hadn't heard him come back. "You did that before you knew the tracks were there," Eli said. "I knew when you told me about the ledger," Samuel said simply. "That's not a marital dispute. That's evidence. And evidence needs to be in front of someone with authority before the man who wants it buried gets close enough to make that harder." Agnes came in from the back hallway and said, "She's awake, and she's asking for Eli." He was out of the chair before Agnes finished the sentence. Clara was sitting up. Not all the way propped on her elbows, but upright enough. Her color was still wrong, too pale in some places, too flushed in others, but her eyes were clear, and they found him the moment he came through the door. "Come here," she said. He came and sat on the edge of the bed. She put her hand against his face the way she'd done since he was small, and he let her, because some things didn't change just because you were 13. "The fever's down some," she said. "I can feel it." Agnes said the same thing. "Where are June and Cody?" "June's on the porch. Cody's still asleep. He ate 3 biscuits last night and asked Agnes if she was a real cook or just practicing." Clara's mouth pulled at one corner. "What did Agnes say?" "She gave him a 4th biscuit." Clara closed her eyes for a moment, opened them. "Tell me what Samuel Cord said this morning." He told her. All of it. The tracks at the creek crossing. Pete riding to Alderman Creed, moving through the night. He told her straight the way she'd always wanted things told, no softening, no reordering to make it easier to hear. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The ledger," she said. "Samuel has it." Her eyes came up fast. "Eli? Mama?" He held her gaze. He read it. He knows what's in it. And he knows some of the names. He paused. He's been up since before Pete got back from the fence. He's not going to use it against us. You don't know that. I know he rode south alone last night to get our wagon, when he didn't have to, Eli said. I know he drew a map of his own land at midnight to figure out where Creed would come from. I know he sent for a lawyer before he knew how close the tracks were. He held her gaze steadily. That's not a man who's working against us, Mama. Clara looked at him. She had that expression, the one where she was weighing something, turning it, looking for the place it gave way. How old are you? She said. 13. You sound about 40. I had good training, he said. Something moved through her face. Not quite a smile. Something that lived in the same place smiles lived, just quieter. I want to talk to him, she said. You need to rest. I need to know the man who's holding evidence that could get my family killed Eli. Bring him in. He brought Samuel in. Samuel came to the doorway and stopped there, hat in hand, not pushing into the room. That was the right instinct, and Eli saw Clara register it the way her shoulders came down a fraction. Mrs. Whitfield, Samuel said, how are you feeling? Like I walked 4 miles in July with a fever. She looked at him directly. You have something that belongs to me. I do. He didn't apologize for it. I read it. I know you did. Then you know I understand what you're carrying. He stayed in the doorway. And you know that ledger is the reason Creed rode through the night. He needs it back, or he needs to put you somewhere you can't use it. What do you intend to do with it? Samuel was quiet a moment. Frank Alderman is the best attorney in this county. Pete rode to him last night. If Alderman gets that ledger in front of the right territorial official, what's in it becomes a matter of record, not something Creed can take back by finding you first. Clara held his gaze. And what do you get out of this, Mr. Cord? Samuel looked at her steadily. 3 children came through my fence yesterday morning. One of them had been carrying his brother since before sunrise, because there was nobody else to do it. His voice didn't change in register. It stayed the same, flat and honest. I'm not the kind of man who looks away from that. The room was quiet. That's not an answer, Clara said. Yes, it is, Samuel said. It's just not the kind you're used to. He put his hat back on. Rest. Alderman should be here by mid-morning. I'd like you to be sitting up when he arrives. He looked at Eli once, something brief and direct, and then he went back down the hallway. Clara looked at Eli. Jury's still out, he said before she could ask. You already said that last night, she said. Jury's still deliberating, he said. She lay back against the pillow and closed her eyes. He sat with her until her breathing slowed into something easier. Then he went back to the kitchen. Hank Alderman arrived at 9. Not Pete's father, as Eli had half imagined, but a compact man in his 50s with quick, intelligent eyes and a handshake that told you he'd made decisions in hard rooms before. He sat across from Samuel at the kitchen table with the ledger open between them and didn't speak for 5 minutes. Eli stood in the doorway. Samuel hadn't asked him to leave. Alderman looked up finally. Where did she find this? Hidden in the house, Eli said. Under the floorboards in the back room. She wasn't looking for it. Alderman looked at him the way Finch had, deciding how much straight talk to aim at a 13-year-old. He seemed to decide on all of it. These 2 names on the 3rd page, he said. You know them. I memorized them, Eli said. When I saw the ledger, I didn't know what they meant then. Do you know now? Eli looked at Samuel. Samuel gave him a small nod. I figured it out about 2 months after we left Billings, Eli said. Men who move cattle money through brokers who aren't supposed to be connected to them. Creed's the connection. Alderman looked at Samuel. The boy's right. He closed the ledger. This isn't just a domestic matter. This is territorial fraud at a level that the marshal's office has been trying to trace for 18 months. He tapped the cover. With this, they have the thread they need to pull. "Can you file something today?" Samuel said. "I can file a protective statement on behalf of Mrs. Whitfield before noon. It gets her account on record before Creed can argue she fabricated anything." Alderman paused. "But Creed is likely already moving to file on his end. Abandonment, property claim, possibly custody. He'll want the legal weight on his side before she can establish hers." "He'll come here today," Eli said. Both men looked at him. "He's close enough," Eli said. "He's not going to give Alderman time to file anything. He'll come to the fence first, see what he's dealing with, try to intimidate whoever's standing on this side of it." He looked at Samuel. "That's how he works. He reads the room before he commits." Alderman stood up and put the ledger in his coat. "Then I need to ride back to town right now. Every hour matters." He looked at Samuel. "Keep them here. Don't let anyone off this property until I've filed." "Already my plan," Samuel said. Alderman left. Pete took him to the road at a trot. The waiting was the hardest part. Eli had always known that the walking had been hard, and the fever had been hard, but the waiting was its own particular weight. He went back to the porch with June, and they sat on the top step and watched the south road together, and neither of them said much because they were both listening for the same thing. Cody found them an hour later, biscuit in hand, eyes bright with the uncomplicated energy of a 6-year-old who had slept 10 hours and eaten a full breakfast. "Pete says I can help him with the fence posts this afternoon," Cody said. "Pete says a lot of things," Eli said. "He says Samuel is the best rancher in this county." "Pete works for Samuel, so." Cody sat down between them. He ate his biscuit and looked at the road. "Is the bad man coming today?" he said. June put her arm around him. "Maybe," she said. "Samuel will make him go away," Cody said. Not a question, not reassurance seeking, just a fact he'd already filed. Eli looked at his brother, 6 years old, and he'd handed his trust to Samuel Cord, somewhere between the fence line and the biscuit tin, without any of the deliberation that Eli was still grinding through. No evidence, no track record, no map drawn at midnight, just something in the boy's bones that said, "This one's safe." Eli didn't say anything about it. He looked back at the road. They came at 11. Not 2 riders. 3. Moving up from the south in a line, deliberate, unhurried, the kind of approach that was designed to be watched. Look how many. Look how serious. Burton Creed was in the middle on a black horse, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, even on the road, with the particular ease of a man who had never had to hurry for anything. Samuel was off the porch before they reached the gate. Eli took 1 step after him. Samuel said without turning around, "Porch Eli." "He's coming for my family." "I know that. Stay on the porch." "I can—" "Eli." Samuel stopped and looked back at him. His voice wasn't hard. It was something beyond hard, certain the way walls are certain. "I gave your mama my word. Don't make that harder than it needs to be." Eli stood at the top of the porch steps. He didn't go in. He didn't go forward. He stood, and he watched, and he put his hands flat at his sides. Samuel walked out to the middle of the yard and stood. That was all. Just stood with his hat on and his hands loose, and his whole bearing the way a man's bearing is when he's already made every decision that needs making. Creed pulled up 20 feet out. His 2 riders flanked him and stopped. "Cord," Creed said. His voice was the same as Eli remembered from the house in Billings, smooth, reasonable on top with something underneath that was neither. "I'm looking for a woman and 3 children. She goes by Clara Whitfield now, but she's legally Clara Creed. I have a right to know if she's on this property." "You have a right to a lot of things on your own land," Samuel said. "This isn't your land." "I'm not looking for trouble." "Then you rode a long way for nothing," Samuel said. "Because trouble's what you'll find here if you keep going." Creed's jaw shifted. He'd expected resistance, Eli could see that, but not this kind, not from this quickly. He'd expected a man who'd hear the word legal and step back. She has property of mine, Creed said. I want it returned. File a claim with Frank Alderman, Samuel said. He's in Morrow Creek. You know the way. Something moved through Creed's face. Quick, and then gone. He'd heard Alderman's name, and it had landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. One of his riders shifted in the saddle and exchanged a look with the other. Eli caught it from the porch. Alderman's name meant something to them, too. She's a sick woman, Creed said, and his voice shifted into something that sounded almost concerned. Almost. She doesn't know what she's doing. I'm her husband, and those are my children by law, and I have a responsibility to— They're not your children, Samuel said. The quiet after that was complete. What did you say to me? Creed's voice had dropped. Eli knew that drop, had heard it through walls and billings. It was the voice that came just before. You heard me, Samuel said. Children aren't property, Mr. Creed, and you are on private land, and I am asking you once clearly to get off it. And if I don't, then I stop asking. Creed looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the house. His eyes moved across the porch, found Eli standing at the top of the steps. They held there for a breath. Eli didn't move, didn't look away. He stood with his hands at his sides and his chin level, and held that gaze the way his mother had taught him to hold things that were trying to knock him down. Creed looked back at Samuel. You're making a mistake, Creed said. Wouldn't be my first, Samuel said. Another beat. Then Creed turned his horse. His riders followed. They moved back down the road at a walk, not a retreat. Creed wouldn't call it that, but they moved. Samuel watched them until they were off the property line. Then he turned and came back to the porch. He looked at Eli. He's not done, Eli said. No, Samuel said. He's not. He came up the steps. But Alderman filed 40 minutes ago. I got Pete's signal from the ridge. He looked at the road. Creed came here to see what he's dealing with. Now he knows. And when he finds out about Alderman, he's going to go straight to his lawyer and try to get something in front of the judge before we can. Do we have time? Judge Waverly comes through Morrow Creek every third Thursday, Samuel said. That's day after tomorrow. Eli looked at him. And Creed knows that. Yes, and he had a lawyer in Billings drawing up papers before he ever left, which means this wasn't rage. This was a plan. Samuel's voice was level. He always planned to use the law. The law is easier to manage than people when you know the right places to press. Eli was quiet for a moment. What do? We talk to your mama, Samuel said, because what I'm thinking is going to require her to be strong enough to appear in front of Waverly the day after tomorrow, or send someone in her place who knows what she knows. He paused. And the only other person in this house who was there is you. The words landed quietly and stayed. Eli stood on the porch in the midday heat. The road south was empty again. Inside, his mother was working on being strong enough. His sister was watching every face in every room. His brother was probably asking Pete something about fence posts. He thought about Creed's eyes on him from across the yard. That flat measuring look that had always meant I see you, and you don't have anything I can't take. For 2 years that look had been right. Eli turned it over in his mind now, standing on Samuel Cord's porch, with Samuel Cord's word behind him, and Frank Alderman's paperwork already on record in Morrow Creek. He thought not anymore. He didn't say it out loud. He wasn't ready to say it out loud. But he held it careful and solid the way you hold something you've just found and aren't sure yet how strong it is. All right, he said. Samuel looked at him. Let's talk to Mama, Eli said. Clara was sitting up when they came in. Not propped on her elbows this time, fully upright back against the headboard, hands folded in her lap. She'd brushed her hair and pinned it back. Agnes must have helped, or she'd done it herself through sheer stubbornness, which was the more likely answer. She looked at their faces when they came through the door the way she always looked at faces, before she looked at anything else. Whatever she found there made her fold her hands tighter. "Tell me," she said. Samuel stood in the doorway. Eli sat on the edge of the bed. He told her about Creed at the gate, 3 riders, the conversation, Alderman's name landing wrong on Creed's face. He told her about Waverly. He told her what Samuel had said about the papers prepared in Billings before Creed ever left. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He planned it before he knew about the ledger," she said. "He planned it the night I found it," Clara said. "I didn't know that then. I thought I was careful going back to bed." She looked at her hands. "He was already 3 steps ahead. He always is." "Not this time," Samuel said from the doorway. Clara looked at him. "Frank Alderman is good, but Creed's lawyer is better paid." "Better paid doesn't mean better," Samuel said. "And Alderman has something Creed's lawyer doesn't." "What's that?" "The truth," Samuel said. "And a ledger to back it up." Clara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked at Eli. "He wants me in front of Waverly." "Alderman does," Eli said. "Day after tomorrow. Your account on record before Creed's filing can take root." "I know what day after tomorrow means." She looked at her hands again. "I can barely stand up long enough to wash my face, Eli." "You stood up long enough to pin your hair," he said. She looked at him. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, not quite exasperation, the thing that lived exactly between them when he said something she couldn't argue with. "What if I can't make it tomorrow, Creek?" she said. The question sat in the room. Eli felt Samuel shift slightly in the doorway. "Then someone who is in that house goes instead," Samuel said. "Someone who saw the ledger, someone who heard what was said through the wall." Clara's eyes moved to Eli slowly. "No," she said. "Mama, he is 13 years old, Samuel." "I know how old he is." "He is not getting on a stand in front of a judge because I was too sick to—" "Clara." Samuel's voice was quiet. Not soft. Quiet which was different, the kind of quiet that carries weight. He came the rest of the way into the room and stood at the foot of the bed. "Judge Waverly has 4 grandchildren. I've known him 11 years. He is not the kind of man who dismisses what a child says because it's inconvenient." He paused. "And I'm not suggesting Eli go instead of you. I'm saying if you can't make it, the case doesn't fall apart. It adjusts." Clara looked at him for a long time. "You've thought all of this through," she said. "Since last night," Samuel said. "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her with the same steady expression he'd had since the fence line. "Because Creed is going to walk into that courthouse in 2 days with papers drawn by a Billings attorney and a story that sounds reasonable to anyone who doesn't know what's underneath it. And the only thing that stops that from working is someone who does know standing up and saying so." He paused. "I'd rather that be you. But if it can't be you, then we use what we have." Clara pressed her lips together. She looked at Eli. Something was working behind her eyes. Not decision-making. Eli knew that look, and this wasn't it. This was a woman confronting the distance between what she wanted to be able to do and what her body was giving her. "Let me try," she said finally. "Try what?" "To stand up, to walk to the kitchen and back." She pushed the blanket aside. "If I can do that today, I can do Morrow Creek tomorrow." Samuel stepped forward and offered his hand. Clara looked at it for a half-second. That particular half-second Eli had been watching for 2 days, the one where she decided whether to let anyone close enough to help. Then she took it. She stood. It cost her. Eli could see it in the set of her jaw, the careful way she found her balance, the breath she took before she moved. But she moved. Samuel kept his hand under her arm, steady, not pulling or guiding, just there, the way a wall is there when you need to lean. She made it to the kitchen and back. She sat down on the edge of the bed and breathed for a moment with her eyes closed. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow." Samuel agreed. He left her to rest. Eli stayed until she was settled, then followed Samuel to the porch. Pete was in the yard doing something with a rope and pretending he hadn't been watching the house. June was on the steps with a piece of bread and her eyes on the road. "Pete," Samuel said. "Sir." "Ride into town this afternoon. I want to know if Creed filed anything at the sheriff's office after he left here." "You think he went straight to Hale," Pete said. "I think he went straight to whoever was most useful." Samuel looked south. "If it's Hale, I want to know what he filed and when. If it's the telegraph office, I want to know who he wired." Pete mounted up without ceremony and was gone down the road at a trot. June looked up at Samuel. "He's going to try to get there first," she said, "before Mama can say anything." "Yes," Samuel said. "He is. Can he do that? Get there first and make the judge believe him before she gets to say anything?" "He can try," Samuel said. "Waverly's a fair man. He hears both sides. But if Creed gets his papers in first, then Alderman counters them," Samuel said. He looked at June with the same directness he used on everyone, which Eli had come to recognize as a form of respect. "June, your mama is going to walk into that courtroom day after tomorrow, and she's going to tell what she knows, and Frank Alderman is going to make sure the right people hear it. That's the plan." June held his gaze. "And if something goes wrong with the plan?" "Then we make a new one," Samuel said. "That's all. You keep working the problem until there aren't any moves left, and we're a long way from that yet." June considered this. Then she nodded once the way she did when she'd decided to accept something and looked back at the road. Eli watched Samuel go back inside and thought about the way he talked to June, not down to her, not around her, straight at her, like she was a person who deserved the actual answer. His real father had talked to him that way. It was not as common as it should have been. He was still thinking about it when Agnes called them for midday dinner. They ate together at the kitchen table, all five of them, and Clara in the doorway for the last part of it, sitting in the chair Agnes had dragged to the hallway entrance so she could be present without having to hold herself upright the whole time. Cody talked about the gray horse and rope work, and approximately 7 things that had happened to him in the last 4 hours, with the vivid detail of a child for whom every hour was its own complete world. June ate quietly and refilled people's cups when they got low without being asked. Agnes moved around all of them like weather present, purposeful, requiring nothing. Eli watched Samuel through the meal. He ate simply and quickly, the way men ate when food was fuel and not an event. He answered Cody's questions about the ranch with the same patience he applied to everything, not performing it, just actually having it. When Cody knocked his cup sideways, Samuel caught it before it went off the table, without looking up from what he was saying to Pete. He didn't look at Clara more than conversation required. But he was aware of her the way Eli was aware of the road, constantly, peripherally, without making a production of it. Eli filed that away. Pete came back from town at 3 in the afternoon, and his face when he rode in told Eli everything before he said a word. Samuel was at the fence with Eli, showing him how to check the wire tension on the south line, teaching not performing with the assumption that the knowledge was worth having when Pete pulled up. He looked at Samuel. "Creed filed with Hale," Pete said. "Abandonment and property claim. Hale accepted it." He paused. "And Creed sent a wire. I couldn't get the full content, but it went to a lawyer in the territorial capital." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "He's going over Waverly's head." "Trying to," Pete said. "If he gets a territorial order before Waverly's hearing, he won't," Samuel said. "The territorial circuit doesn't move that fast, and he knows it. He's doing it to create noise. Make it look like the weight is on his side before the hearing." He looked at Pete. "Did you talk to Alderman?" "Alderman's already filed the protective statement, and he's got the ledger in his office under lock." Pete shifted in the saddle. "He said to tell you he needs Mrs. Whitfield there in person, if at all possible. Waverly will hear a statement without her, but Creed's lawyer will argue it's inadmissible without cross-examination. Alderman says her being there changes the whole shape of it." Samuel nodded. He looked at Eli. "She'll be there," Eli said. Pete went to the barn. Samuel went back to the fence wire. He checked the tension on the next post and moved to the one after that, and Eli walked beside him in the dry grass, and neither of them said anything for a while. Pete said Hale accepted the filing, Eli said. He did. You said Hale owes Creed. He does. So Hale's already working against us. Hale's a coward who stays out of things until he knows which way they're going, Samuel said. He's not a bad man exactly. He's a careful one. He'll follow whatever the court decides because that's the safe thing to do. He tested the next post with one hand. Which means the court deciding the right way is more important than worrying about Hale. Eli thought about that. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. The names in the ledger, the two on the third page. He watched Samuel's face. You recognize them. Samuel's hand stilled on the fence post. Not from personal dealings, he said after a moment. From before. When I was a deputy marshal in Kansas. Those names came up in a case that went nowhere because the connection couldn't be proved. He looked at the wire. The man whose case it was, he was a good marshal. He retired bitter because he knew something was there and couldn't touch it. And now it's in a ledger in Frank Alderman's office, Eli said. Yes. Eli looked at the fence line stretching south. That's why you moved so fast. It wasn't just us. Samuel turned and looked at him with an expression that was direct and undefended. It was you, he said. 3 children and a sick woman at my fence. That's where it started, and that's what it is. He paused. But yes, those names mean something to me, and making sure they end up in front of someone who can do something with them that matters to me beyond your situation. Is that why you're helping us? No, Samuel said. I told you why I'm helping you. I meant it. He held Eli's gaze. But I won't pretend those names are nothing to me. You deserve the straight answer. Eli looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once slow the way Samuel nodded when he'd accepted something. All right, he said. They went back to checking the fence. That evening after supper, Samuel found Eli on the porch. He came out with 2 cups and handed one over and stood beside him without requiring conversation. The light was going orange and long across the dry grass, and somewhere past the barn a nightbird had started up. I need you to be ready for something, Samuel said. Eli waited. Alderman wants you there tomorrow, not just your mama. Samuel looked at the fence line. He thinks your testimony about the ledger, what you saw, what you heard that night, adds weight that Clara's account alone might not have. 2 independent witnesses instead of 1. Eli was quiet. Creed's lawyer will try to dismiss your account because of your age, Samuel said. Alderman knows that. Waverly knows that. It won't work with Waverly, but it will be attempted, and you need to be ready for it. I've been ready for it since I was 11, Eli said. Samuel looked at him sideways. Roy Creed has been telling me that nothing I say matters since the week he married my mother, Eli said. I've had a long time to get comfortable with the fact that some men are going to say that. He turned the cup in his hands. Doesn't make it true. Samuel was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It doesn't. The nightbird called again. Eli looked at the dark line of the road south. He's out there somewhere, Eli said. Creed, he's not at an inn being patient, he's planning. I know. What happens if he comes back tonight before the hearing? Then I deal with it, Samuel said. Same as this morning. 3 men last time. Could be more this time. Could be. Samuel's voice didn't change. Pete's taking the watch tonight. I'll take it after midnight. Nobody comes onto this property without us knowing. Eli looked at him. You haven't slept properly since we got here. I've slept enough. That's not what I said. Samuel almost smiled. It was the closest Eli had seen him get to one. You're going to make someone a very difficult conversation partner someday, he said. I learned it somewhere, Eli said. Samuel looked at him. Then he set his cup on the rail and went inside. Eli stayed on the porch. He could hear through the window Agnes finishing up in the kitchen, Cody's voice asking something about tomorrow, June's quieter answer. And from the back of the house, low and steady, his mother's voice talking to someone. He listened and picked out Samuel's voice answering. He didn't try to hear the words. It wasn't his conversation. He looked at the dark road and turned over what was coming. The courtroom. Waverly. Creed's lawyer, with his practiced, reasonable voice dissecting everything Eli had seen and heard and remembered, looking for the loose thread that would unravel it. He pressed his hands flat against his knees and breathed. He knew what he'd seen. He knew what he'd heard. It was in him, as clear as anything he'd ever known. The ledger under the floorboard, the names on the third page. Creed's voice through the wall, saying that ledger doesn't exist, and neither do you if you make it someone else's problem. 6 weeks of walking and fear, and his brother's weight on his back, hadn't blurred any of it. If anything, each mile had pressed it in deeper. He heard the back door open and close quietly. Footsteps across the porch boards behind him. Then his mother's hand on his shoulder, lighter than usual, less certain, but there. He reached up and covered her hand with his. "You should be in bed," he said. She said. "I woke up and I needed air." She came and stood beside him, and he moved to give her the rail to hold if she needed it, and she held it. They looked at the same dark road. "Samuel told me what Alderman wants," she said. "He told me too." "Eli, I don't want you to, Mama." He turned to face her. She looked tired and pale and stubborn in equal measure, which meant she looked like herself. "I know what I saw. I know what I heard. That man has been using our silence against us for 2 years, and I am done being quiet on his behalf." He held her gaze. "Let me do this." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was trying to find the lie and couldn't locate it. "Your daddy would have." "Don't," he said. "Not right now." She closed her mouth. "Tell me after," he said. "Tell me whatever you want to tell me after it's done. Right now, I just need you to say, 'All right.'" The night was very quiet around them. The road stayed empty and dark. Inside, Agnes was saying something to Cody, and Cody was answering in the particular loud whisper of a child who thinks he's being quiet. Clara looked at her son, 13 years old, with road dust still in the creases of his knuckles and something behind his eyes that had been put there by 2 years of watching and waiting and carrying what no child should have to carry. "All right," she said. He nodded. He turned back to the road. She stood beside him and held the rail, and they were quiet together, the way they'd always been able to be quiet together, the particular silence of two people who didn't need to fill space to be present in it. After a while, she went back inside. Eli stayed on the porch until Pete came to take the watch, and then he went to his cot and lay down in the dark with his hands folded on his chest. Will was breathing beside him. June was a quiet shape on the other cot. He thought about tomorrow. The road to Morrow Creek, Waverly's courtroom. The moment he would stand up and say out loud in front of a judge. Everything he had been carrying since the night he stood in a doorway in Billings and understood for the first time exactly what kind of man his mother had married. He was not afraid of the words. He'd been saying them in his head for 6 weeks. He was not afraid of Creed's lawyer or Creed's eyes across a courtroom or whatever reasonable-sounding story they would build out of abandonment and debt and the particular cruelty of making someone else's truth sound like a lie. What he felt lying in the dark on Samuel Cord's ranch with Pete's boots on the porch outside was something he didn't have a clean name for yet. Not courage exactly. Not anger, though there was anger in it somewhere. It was simpler than both of those things. It was just enough. 2 years of enough. 6 weeks of enough. And tomorrow, finally, somewhere to put it. He closed his eyes. He slept. Clara got herself dressed without help. Eli heard her moving in the back bedroom before first light. the careful, deliberate sounds of a woman who had decided something and was executing it before anyone could argue. He was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee Agnes had left on the stove when his mother came through the doorway. She was pale and moving carefully, but she was dressed, and her hair was pinned, and her chin was level. She looked at Eli across the kitchen and dared him with her eyes to say anything about it. He poured her a cup of coffee and pushed it across the table. She sat down and took it with both hands and didn't say thank you, which meant she was grateful enough that words felt insufficient. He understood that. He felt the same way about most things this morning. Samuel came in from outside at 5:30 and looked at Clara and then at Eli and said nothing about either of them being up before dawn, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. He poured coffee and stood at the counter and said, "Alderman will meet us at the courthouse at 9. Waverly comes in at 9:30. We need to leave here by 7. "We'll be ready," Clara said. "Agnes is staying with June and Cody," Samuel said. "Pete too." Clara looked up. "June won't like that." "June already knows," Samuel said. "I talked to her last night." Clara's expression shifted slightly. "You talked to my 8-year-old daughter about courtroom strategy." "I talked to your 8-year-old daughter about staying home and keeping her brother calm," Samuel said. "She asked 4 questions, requested a full account upon our return, and agreed." He paused. "She also told me to make sure you ate breakfast before we left." Clara looked at the table. Something crossed her face that she turned away from quickly, the particular expression of a mother who had been seen to by her child and didn't know whether to be proud or heartbroken about it. "Then I'd better eat," she said. Agnes had biscuits and eggs ready at 6. Cody ate with his eyes still mostly closed and didn't ask about the gray horse, which meant even he understood this morning was different. June sat at the corner of the table and watched everyone's faces the way she always did, taking inventory. And when Clara had eaten half her plate, June silently moved the other half of her own biscuit onto her mother's without looking at her. Clara ate it. She didn't make a production of it. Neither did June. Eli watched that exchange and put it away somewhere he kept things that mattered. They left at 7 in Samuel's wagon, Clara on the bench between Samuel and Eli, which hadn't been discussed and didn't need to be. The road to Morrow Creek was 18 miles of dry, flat ground, and they made it in good time, the horses moving steady, nobody talking much. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of what was coming, full of what everyone was holding, full of the particular weight of a day that was going to matter. Halfway there, Clara said quietly, "If something goes wrong in there—" "It won't," Eli said. "I need you to let me finish." He waited. "If something goes wrong," she said, "and Waverly rules in Creed's favor on the preliminary claim, I need you to know that we don't stop. We go to the territorial level. We use the ledger. We keep going." She kept her eyes on the road. "He has beaten me before by making me feel like there was no next move. I need you to know there is always a next move." "I know that," Eli said. "I know you know it. I'm saying it out loud because I need to hear myself say it." She paused. 2 years ago, I stopped saying it, and that's when he won." Samuel kept his eyes on the road and said nothing, and Eli understood that was exactly the right thing. Frank Alderman was on the courthouse steps when they pulled up, and he looked at Clara getting down from the wagon under her own power, and something in his expression settled relief, Eli thought, recalculating what he was working with. "Mrs. Whitfield," Alderman said, "you look considerably better than I was afraid you might." "I look terrible," Clara said. "Let's go inside." Alderman almost smiled. He turned and led them up the steps without further ceremony. The courtroom was smaller than Eli had imagined, a plain room with wooden benches and a raised desk at the front where Judge Waverly would sit. It smelled like dust and old paper. Creed was already there. He was standing near the front with a man in a gray coat who had the particular ease of someone who spent his life in rooms like this and had learned to use that ease as a weapon. Creed's lawyer, well-dressed, composed, with eyes that moved across the room and cataloged everything in it quickly and without expression. Creed saw them come in. His eyes moved across Clara, across Eli, across Samuel. His face did something complicated and then locked down into the smooth, reasonable expression that Eli had watched him wear in public for 2 years. The face that made strangers think, that's a man who has things together. Clara walked to her side of the room without looking at him. She sat down and folded her hands in her lap and faced forward. She did not look at Burton Creed once. Eli sat beside her, and Samuel took the bench behind them, and the room filled with that particular tight silence that courtrooms carry before anything starts. Judge Waverly came in without announcement, a heavy man with white hair and the face of someone who had heard everything at least twice and was not surprised by any of it. He sat arranged. His papers looked at both sides of the room with the brisk attention of a man who had a schedule. "I have 2 filings," Waverly said. A claim of abandonment and marital property dispute from Mr. Burton Creed and a counterstatement from Mrs. Clara Whitfield represented by Frank Alderman. He looked at both sides. "Mr. Alderman, your filing indicates 2 witnesses." "That's correct, Your Honor. Mrs. Whitfield and her son Eli Whitfield, age 13. Creed's lawyer was on his feet. "Your Honor, with respect, the testimony of a minor." "Sit down, Mr. Voss." Waverly didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'll determine the weight of testimony once I've heard it. That's the entire purpose of this proceeding." He looked at Eli directly. "Son, you understand what it means to tell the truth in this room?" Eli stood. "Yes, sir. It means I say what I know and nothing past it." Waverly studied him for a moment, with the particular attention of a man deciding something. "That's exactly what it means," he said. "Sit down until you're called." Creed went first. He was good. Eli had known he would be 2 years of watching that man operate in public, had given him a thorough education in how Burton Creed presented himself when the stakes were high. He was calm measured, and he arranged the facts in an order that made his version sound like plain common sense. The abandoned home. The debt Clara had incurred against the property. The 3 children removed without his knowledge or consent. The expense and hardship of the search. He said my wife and my children and our home in a careful rhythm that made it sound like concern, and his lawyer nodded along with the composed satisfaction of a man watching a performance he'd rehearsed many times. Eli watched Clara through all of it. She didn't move, didn't react. She sat with her hands folded and her eyes forward, and she let the words go over her, the way water goes over something that has decided not to be moved. He thought she's been practicing this for 2 years too, learning to hold still while he talked. When Creed finished, Waverly looked at him over his glasses. "Mr. Creed, the counter-filing makes a specific allegation regarding your financial records. I'd like a direct response." Creed's jaw moved just slightly. "Your Honor, that's a fabrication by a woman who is attempting to deflect from her own. Yes or no will do for the moment," Waverly said. A pause. "The allegation is false," Creed said. "Thank you. Mr. Alderman." Clara testified for 14 minutes. She was precise the way a person is precise when they have been over the same ground in their own mind so many times that every detail is worn smooth and certain. She described the ledger where it was, what was in it, the names and the numbers, and what she understood them to represent. She described the conversation through the bedroom wall. She described the night she made the decision to leave. She said it in 2 sentences, and neither of them shook. "He told me that if I ever repeated what I had seen to anyone who mattered, he would make certain I regretted it. I believed him, because I had already seen him make good on that kind of promise." The room was quiet after that, with a quality that was different from the quiet before, heavier, like something had shifted the air. Creed's lawyer rose for cross-examination. He was careful, smart enough to see that going hard at a sick woman who had traveled 18 miles to testify would read badly to Waverly, so he pressed on details instead, dates, specific wording, whether the fever had affected her memory, whether her account of the ledger was informed by a desire to gain advantage in a property dispute. Clara answered every question in the same even voice. She gave him nothing extra to work with. Each answer was exactly as long as it needed to be, and stopped there the way her footsteps on the road had stopped at the fence, and not one step before it. When Voss sat down, Waverly made a note and looked at Alderman. "Your second witness." Eli stood up. He walked to the front of the room. He could feel Creed's eyes on him from the left side, that flat measuring weight he'd felt for 2 years, the gaze that said, "You don't have anything I can't manage." He didn't look at Creed. He faced Waverly and stood where Alderman indicated and kept his hands still at his sides. "State your name," Waverly said. "Eli James Whitfield." "How old are you, Eli?" 13, sir. 14 in October." Waverly looked at him with the full attention of a man who had decided to take something seriously. "Tell me what you know. Your own words from the beginning." Eli told him. He told him about the ledger, not just that it existed, but where it was hidden, the specific board in the back bedroom closet, the third from the left, the way it gave slightly underweight, the corner of the cover he'd seen when he was 10 years old and had put back without understanding. He told him he'd seen it again the night his mother found it through the doorway she hadn't fully closed, and that he'd seen her face when she was reading it, and known from her face alone that what was in it was serious. He told him about the conversation through the wall. The exact words, not paraphrased, not softened, the exact words, the ones he'd held in his memory for 8 months, like something he didn't dare let go of because he knew it would matter someday. Creed's voice saying that ledger doesn't exist, and neither do you if you make it someone else's problem. Then he said the names. He said them the way he'd been saying them in his head for 6 weeks, clearly, without hesitation, without looking away from Waverly's face. The reaction from Creed's side of the room was immediate. Voss was on his feet. Creed had gone completely still in a way that was more alarming than any movement, the stillness of a man who has just had something taken that he thought was his. "Your Honor," Voss began. "Sit down, Mr. Voss," Waverly said. He hadn't looked away from Eli. His face had changed, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't watching for it, but something behind his eyes had shifted in the way things shift when information connects to other information that has been waiting. "Say those names again, son," Waverly said. Eli said them again, clearly, slowly. Waverly wrote both names on his paper. He looked at what he'd written for a moment. Then he looked at Voss with an expression that had traveled a considerable distance from where it had been 20 minutes ago. "Mr. Voss," he said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd encourage you to think before you answer it. Are you aware of any connection between your client and the individuals this boy just named?" Voss's pause was a fraction too long. "No, Your Honor," he said. Waverly looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he looked at Eli. "Thank you, son. You can sit down." Eli walked back to the bench. Samuel put his hand on Eli's shoulder, one solid pressure brief, and then gone and said nothing because nothing needed saying. What happened in the next 20 minutes was the part Eli hadn't planned for. Waverly called a recess. He went into the back room, and the bailiff turned away Voss when he tried to follow. Creed sat in his chair and said nothing, and the stillness around him was the kind that comes from a man doing rapid internal calculations. His eyes moved once to Clara, then to Eli, then to a point on the wall that wasn't anything, and he looked at that point and worked through whatever he was working through. Clara reached over and put her hand over Eli's on the bench. He turned his hand over and held hers, and neither of them said a word. Alderman came and sat beside Clara and spoke to her quietly. She listened and nodded. Samuel leaned forward from the bench behind and rested his forearms on his knees and waited with the patience of a man who had learned that the most important moments usually required you to do nothing at all. When Waverly came back, his face had the careful arrangement of a man who has made a decision and is being precise about how he delivers it. "I am continuing this matter," Waverly said. The names raised in testimony this morning require investigation before I can rule on the primary claim. He looked at Voss. Mr. Creed's filing is suspended pending that investigation. Mr. Creed will make himself available for further questioning at a date to be determined and will not travel outside this territory. He looked at Creed directly. Do you understand? Creed met his gaze. His face was controlled. His hands on the table were not. Yes, he said. Good. Waverly gathered his papers. He looked at Clara. Mrs. Whitfield, the custody and property claims filed against you are suspended. The abandonment filing is suspended. You are under no legal obligation to return to your previous residence, and you are free to go where you need to go with your children. He paused, and something in his face that had been judicial and measured went briefly human. I'm sorry this required you to travel in your condition to say what you said today. You should not have had to do that. Clara held his gaze. Thank you, Your Honor, she said. The room began to move. Chairs scraping, Voss bending toward Creed and speaking in a rapid undertone. Creed listening. Then Creed standing. He looked across the room at Clara. It was the first time she had looked directly at him since they'd walked through the courthouse door, not avoiding it, waiting for the right moment, and this was it. She looked at Burton Creed with her chin level and her hands folded in her lap and her eyes clear, and she held it. Eli watched it happen. I watched the exact moment something changed in her face, not a hardening, not anger, something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. The moment when a person stops being afraid of something that hurt them. It didn't announce itself. It just arrived and settled and was there. It lasted 5 seconds. Then Creed turned and walked out, and Voss followed him, and the door closed. Clara sat completely still for one moment. Then she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and closed her eyes and breathed. Aldermen shook their hands outside on the steps and told them what came next. The investigation would take weeks, possibly months, but the names on record changed the shape of everything, changed what could be ignored and what couldn't. He said it plainly and without performance, the way professionals speak when the news is genuinely good and doesn't need dressing up. When he walked away, the four of them stood on the courthouse steps: Clara, Eli, Samuel, Pete, who had materialized at some point during the recess with his hat in his hand and an expression of barely contained relief. I still think there should have been more of a fight, Pete said. Clara laughed. It was sudden and real and surprised sounding, like it caught her before she could prepare for it, and the sound of it did something to Eli's chest that he didn't have a name for, cracked something open that had been sealed up for a long time, and let some air into it. Samuel was looking at her when she laughed. Eli noticed. He noticed the way Samuel found something else to look at almost immediately after, like a man catching himself doing something private in public. Eli said nothing about it. He put it where he put things that mattered and would matter more later. On the road back, Clara sat up on the bench between Samuel and Eli, which was not what anyone had planned. Agnes's folded blanket was still in the wagon bed unused. Samuel had looked at her when she climbed up, and she had looked back at him, and he had moved over without a word. An hour out from Morrow Creek, she said quietly, barely audible over the road, "Thank you." Not to Eli, to Samuel. "You did that yourself," Samuel said. He kept his eyes on the road. "No." A pause. "You made it possible." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "You and your boy both did the work," he said. "I just held the fence open." Eli looked straight ahead at the road and let the silence do what it needed to do. He was tired in a way that went through every layer of him. Tired in his bones, tired in the places that fear had been living for 8 months. Tired in the particular way of someone who has been carrying something at full tension and has just been allowed to set it down. But it was different from the tiredness of the road, different from the tiredness of 6 weeks of watching over his shoulder. This tiredness had a floor under it. It went down and hit something solid. He thought about Waverly's face when the names landed, the quality of the silence in that room. Creed's hands on the table not controlled. He thought about his mother's eyes going clear. He thought about June on the porch steps this morning, watching their faces when they left, calculating whether she was going to be all right with what she found there. He thought about what she would find on their faces when they came back through the gate. He thought about Cody, who had probably spent the entire day following Pete around the property, asking questions about rope and horses, and why the sky was whatever color it was at any given moment, completely unbothered. The road ran long and dry ahead of them, and the afternoon light was going gold across the flat land. And Samuel held the reins steady, and Clara's shoulder was warm against Eli's arm, and the wagon moved on, and no one said anything that needed saying, because sometimes the silence after a thing is the realest part of it. They were a mile from the ranch when Clara said very quietly, "He's going to fight the investigation." "Yes," Samuel said. "It could take months." "It will take months." She was quiet for a moment. "We can't impose on you for months." "You're not imposing," Samuel said. He said it the way he said everything, flat and certain without decoration. "You're here. That's different from imposing." Clara looked at him. Eli felt it from where he was sitting, the quality of attention she turned on Samuel when she was deciding whether to trust something she'd just been told. "You mean that?" she said. "I don't say things I don't mean," Samuel said. "Takes too much energy to keep track of." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something that lived near smiles and was building toward one. "You're a stubborn man," she said. "I've been told," Samuel said. Eli said nothing. He looked at the road ahead of them, at the gate coming up at the shape of the ranch that was not his, and had started to feel like something he didn't have a word for yet. Something in the direction of solid, in the direction of known, in the direction of a place that didn't require him to watch his back. Every moment he was standing in it. The gate came up. Pete jumped down and got it open. They came through. June was on the porch steps exactly where Eli had known she would be, arms crossed, jaw set. She looked at their faces one by one. Whatever she found there made her shoulders come down from around her ears. She stood up and walked across the yard to Clara and put her arms around her mother's waist and held on without saying a word. Clara held her back and pressed her cheek against the top of June's head and closed her eyes. Cody appeared around the side of the barn with a rope in both hands, and what appeared to be a philosophical question forming on his face, then stopped when he saw the group in the yard and recalibrated. "Did you win?" he said. "We held our ground," Eli said. Cody thought about this. "Pete says holding ground is better than winning," he said, "because winning is a moment, but ground is yours as long as you stand on it." Pete made a face that suggested he was not entirely sure he deserved credit for that. Eli looked at his brother. 6 years old, trailing a rope covered in dust, entirely unbothered, holding a piece of wisdom he'd absorbed from someone who'd earned it. He thought, yeah, that's about right. He looked at the gate behind them, open and ordinary now. The fence line running south in both directions, dry and straight and reliable. The ground under his boots that was not his, and had let him stand on it anyway. He thought about everything he'd said in that courtroom. The words he'd been carrying for 8 months now out of him and on record in a place where they couldn't be taken back or buried or undone. Ground, he thought. As long as you stand on it. "Come on!" Agnes called from the doorway. "Food's getting cold, and I'm not warming it twice." They went inside. The night after the hearing was the first night Eli slept without listening for hoofbeats. He didn't realize it until he woke up, and the light was already coming through the window at a late angle, and the house was full of morning sounds. Agnes in the kitchen, Cody's voice, the particular creak of the back door that meant Pete was coming in from the early check. He lay still for a moment and understood that he had slept through all of it. 7 hours without surfacing once, without counting breaths or tracking road sounds or calculating distances. He lay there and let that land. Then he got up. Clara was at the kitchen table with Agnes's coffee and Alderman's follow-up letter, which had arrived with a rider before 7. She was reading it with the focused stillness she brought to things that required her full attention, and she didn't look up when Eli came in, which meant she was either concentrating or she had something to tell him that she was working up to. He poured coffee and sat across from her and waited. She put the letter down. Alderman filed the ledger as material evidence with the Territorial Marshal's office yesterday evening, she said. The Marshal's office confirmed receipt this morning. That was fast, Eli said. Waverly moved fast, Clara said. Alderman says he'd never seen Waverly act on something the same day before. She looked at the letter. The names you said in that courtroom, Alderman says they're connected to a case the Marshal's office has been building for 2 years. They didn't have the financial thread. She paused. The ledger is the thread. Eli wrapped both hands around his cup. So it's bigger than Creed. It was always bigger than Creed, Clara said. Creed was just the piece of it that we were close enough to see. She looked at him. Alderman says the Marshal wants to speak with both of us, in person, within the week. Here. He's willing to come to us. She set the letter flat on the table. Given the circumstances. Eli thought about that. A territorial marshal riding out to Samuel Cord's ranch to take testimony from a woman who'd been running for 6 weeks with 3 children and a broken wagon. 6 weeks ago, that would have felt like something from a different world entirely, the world where the law was something that could be on your side. What does Samuel say? Eli said. I haven't told him yet. She held his gaze. I wanted to tell you first. He understood what she was doing, making sure he knew he was still part of the decision-making. That the last 6 weeks hadn't been a temporary emergency arrangement, after which things would revert to her deciding everything alone. He was 13, not 30, and she was his mother, and always would be. But she was telling him with that look that the thing they'd built together on the road, that particular partnership made of necessity and trust, wasn't being put away now that the immediate danger had passed. Tell him at breakfast, Eli said. Tell him the same time you tell him everything else. Something in her face settled. All right, she said. Samuel took the news the way he took most news he listened, he thought, and then he said something practical. The Marshal coming here is better than you riding to him. You're still recovering and the children need stable ground right now. He looked at Clara over his coffee cup. I'll send Pete to Alderman today with confirmation. You don't have to, Clara started. I know I don't have to, Samuel said. Same tone he'd used at the fence at the courtroom steps at every point along the way when she'd started a sentence with you don't have to. Even and certain, and closing the door on the argument before it got through it. Pete rides today. Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, You are a remarkably difficult man to owe a debt to. Good, Samuel said. Then stop trying to owe me one. Cody looked up from his biscuit. Are we staying? He said. The table went quiet. It was the same question he'd asked before the morning after the hearing, with the same blunt economy of a child who had identified the central question and couldn't understand why the adults kept talking around it. He looked at Clara with the open, patient expression of someone who genuinely did not understand why this required more than 30 seconds of consideration. Clara looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at the table in front of him with the careful expression of a man who had an answer and was letting her have the space to arrive at it herself. We don't have a house, Clara said. Samuel has a house, Cody said. We don't have an income. You could do the accounts, June said very quietly from her end of the table. Everyone looked at her. She looked back at them with the undisturbed steadiness of someone stating an obvious fact. You found 3 errors in the ranch ledger in 20 minutes. Samuel said so. She looked at Samuel. You said so. I did say that, Samuel said. June? Clara said. I'm just saying the numbers make sense, June said, which was almost exactly what Cody had said, except delivered with entirely different energy. Not the blunt simplicity of a 6-year-old, but the focused precision of an 8-year-old who had done the math and was presenting her findings. Eli kept his face still and looked at his coffee. It's not about numbers, Clara said. "What is it about?" Cody said. The question hung over the table the way Cody's questions always did, too simple to dismiss, too direct to go around. Clara looked at her son. Then she looked at her coffee. Then she looked at Samuel, which was the look Eli had been watching her work toward for 3 days. "Could you give us a moment?" Clara said. To Agnes and Pete. Agnes was already moving. Pete took his biscuit and his hat and was through the door before anyone asked twice. Cody started to follow Agnes and then appeared to think better of it and sat back down, because Cody had many qualities and self-preservation instinct was among them. "Cody," Eli said. "I'm being quiet," Cody said. "Quieter." Cody put his biscuit down. Clara looked at Samuel. "I need to say something and I need you to let me finish it." "All right," Samuel said. "I made a bad decision 3 years ago," she said. "I married a man because he looked like stability, and I was tired, and I had 3 children, and I told myself that was enough reason." She kept her eyes on Samuel's. "It wasn't enough reason. And I have spent 2 years paying for that, and I have spent 6 weeks running from it, and I have spent the last 4 days watching you." She stopped, started again. "I have spent the last 4 days watching you do things that men don't do for strangers, and I need you to understand that I see that. I am not someone who misses things." "I know you're not," Samuel said. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know that too. I have 3 children and an ongoing territorial investigation, and I haven't slept a full night in 8 months, and I don't—" She pressed her lips together. "I don't trust easily. I don't think I'm going to get easier to trust just because circumstances have improved." Samuel looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking you to trust easy," he said. "I'm asking you to trust what you've seen, same as you'd ask anyone else." The kitchen was very quiet. Eli looked at the window. June was looking at her hands. Cody had gone entirely still, which was either his version of giving people space or his version of being riveted with Cody. It was sometimes the same thing. "This house has been empty of the right things for 4 years, Samuel said. "I'm not going to dress that up in something it isn't. And you came through my fence with 3 children and a fever and a piece of evidence that's going to bring down men who thought they were untouchable." He paused. "I don't think that happened by accident. I don't know what to call it. But I know I'm not interested in watching you walk away from it to be careful." Clara held his gaze for a long moment. "I'd probably argue with you about something within the week," she said. "I'd probably deserve it," he said. June made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Cody looked at June and then at Eli and then back at Clara with the expression of a child who has understood that something important has just been decided, even if he couldn't have said exactly what. "So we're staying," Cody said. Clara looked at her youngest son. Something in her face went through a change that was slow and complete, like weather moving across open ground, the last of something releasing, something new settling in behind it. She looked at Samuel. "We're staying," she said. It wasn't a grand moment. Nobody announced it, or stood up, or said anything that would have sounded important if you'd written it down. Agnes came back in from the hallway, because Agnes had clearly been standing in the hallway, and she went to the stove with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting for the right conclusion and is now moving on to the practical business of celebrating it with food. Pete appeared in the doorway a moment later with his hat in his hand and a grin he was only partly managing to contain. "Told you," Pete said to no one in particular. "Nobody asked you," Samuel said. "No, sir," Pete said, and didn't stop grinning. The week that followed was the one that changed the shape of things. Not dramatically, not all at once. It happened the way real things happen in small specific moments that you only understood as significant when you looked back at them later. The marshal came on the 4th day. His name was Garrett, a lean man of 50, with a quiet authority that didn't require volume. He sat at Samuel's kitchen table with aldermen beside him, and he took Clara's testimony for 2 hours, and then Eli's for 40 minutes, and he asked questions that told Eli he'd been working this case a long time and knew exactly which pieces he'd been missing. When Eli said the names from the third page of the ledger, Garrett wrote them down and then looked at him with an expression that Eli recognized as the particular relief of a man who has just found the thing he'd been looking for in the last place he thought to look. "You've had this for 6 weeks, Garrett said. "Yes, sir." "On the road?" "Yes, sir." Garrett looked at Clara. "Your son carried this to me across 2 territories." "He carries a lot of things," Clara said. Her voice was steady, and her eyes were on Eli, and there was something in them he hadn't seen in a long time. The particular look that was not pride exactly, but was first cousin to it and sat deeper. Garrett left with the ledger and Alderman's full case file, and the promise that a warrant for Creed's arrest would be processed at the territorial level within 72 hours. Not suspended pending investigation. Arrested. The ledger, combined with Eli's testimony about the names, had moved the case from a domestic matter to a territorial criminal proceeding, and that changed everything about the speed at which the law was willing to move. 3 days later, Pete rode in from Morrow Creek with a letter from Alderman. He handed it to Samuel at the fence where they were working, and Samuel read it and handed it to Eli without a word. Eli read it. Burton Creed had been taken into custody the previous evening at the territorial line. He'd been attempting to leave. The warrant had arrived 4 hours before he reached the crossing. Eli read that sentence twice. Then he folded the letter and put it in his pocket and went back to the fence work without saying anything, because there weren't words for it yet. The thing that happens in your chest when a fear you've been carrying so long, it started to feel like furniture is suddenly permanently gone. It left a shape where it had been like an outline in the air, and he needed a moment before he could speak around it. Samuel worked the wire beside him and didn't push. After a while, Eli said, "He's not coming back." "No," Samuel said. "Even if the trial takes months. He's in custody. He can't travel. He can't file anything that carries weight. And when the trial happens, what you put on record in Waverly's courtroom isn't going anywhere." Samuel checked the tension on the post. "It's done, Eli." Eli pressed his hands against the fence post and looked south, the same direction he'd been watching for 2 months. The same direction everything bad had come from. It looked different now, just land flat and dry and ordinary, without anything moving on it that he needed to calculate. He let out a breath that felt like it had been building since Billings. "All right," he said. He turned back to the fence. What happened in the weeks after that was the quietest and most important thing. Clara took over the ranch accounts and found 2 more errors within the first week and fixed them without commentary, and Samuel looked at the corrected ledger with an expression of uncomplicated respect that Eli had started to recognize as one of his highest forms of communication. She began organizing the household with the competent efficiency of a woman who had been running things alone for years and was now simply applying that capability to a larger territory. Agnes yielded ground gracefully and with apparent satisfaction, ceding the bread entirely to June, who had improved the recipe twice more and showed no signs of stopping. Cody learned to rope a fence post. Then he learned to rope a barrel. Then he announced his intention to rope the gray horse, and Pete spent an afternoon explaining why that was a different proposition which Cody accepted philosophically and stored away for later. Eli worked the south pasture with Samuel in the mornings, checking water levels, reading the drought damage in the soil, learning to see the land the way a rancher sees it, not as scenery, but as a living system with its own logic and its own requirements. Samuel taught the way he did everything directly with the assumption that the person learning was worth teaching. No performance, no patience demonstrated for its own sake, just the actual efficient transfer of knowledge from one person to another. One afternoon a week after Creed's arrest, Eli was checking the water trough at the far south fence, and he stopped walking and stood still and looked at the land around him. Dry and wide and flat. Real in the way things are real when they're not trying to be anything other than what they are. The fence line running straight and reliable in both directions. The trough holding water. the ground solid under his boots. He had crossed this ground carrying his brother. He stood on it now with nothing in his hands and no weight on his back and the particular clean tiredness of someone who has worked a full day doing something that mattered. He checked the trough. It was holding fine. He turned and walked back toward the house. Samuel was on the porch when he got back 2 cups on the rail, which had become the end-of-day thing, without either of them arranging it. Eli took his cup and stood beside him, and they looked at the fence line in the last of the afternoon light. "Alderman sent word," Samuel said. "The territorial trial date has been set, 4 months out." "We'll be here," Eli said. "Yes." Samuel looked at the fence. "I told him that." Eli turned his cup in his hands. "Lyle asked if we were staying," he said, remembering what Alderman had written in the letter. "For the record." "He did," Samuel said. "What did you tell him?" Samuel looked at him. "I told him I had strong reason to believe the Whitfield family would be in this county for the foreseeable future," he said, "and that he could consider that confirmed." Eli held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once. The way Samuel nodded when something had been decided, and the deciding was the end of it. He looked back at the land. Behind them, through the open window, he could hear his mother's voice and Samuel's name in it not distress something easier than that the particular tone of a woman speaking to someone she had decided to trust with the full register of her voice. Agnes's answer came back from somewhere in the kitchen. June said something sharp and funny that Eli couldn't quite make out, and Clara laughed the real kind, the kind that had surprised her outside the courthouse, the kind that had been sealed up for too long and was now finding its way back into regular use. Cody's voice rose above all of it, wanting to know what was funny. Pete's laugh came from somewhere near the barn. Eli stood on the porch in the evening quiet and let all of it land. The sound of his family inside a house that had stopped being a stranger's house. The fence line that had let them through. The ground that had held them when they had nothing else to stand on. He thought about what his mother used to say when the nights got heavy and he was young enough to need it. "Tell me something good, Eli. Anything. Just find one thing." He had more than one thing now. He had a full house and food on the table, and his mother's laugh coming through an open window, and a man beside him on the porch who had held a fence wire open with both hands so his family wouldn't catch on it. He had ground. He had the particular irreversible fact of having come through something that had tried to bury them and finding on the other side of it that they were still standing. He looked south one last time, that long flat stretch of land that had been the direction of danger and running and fear for the better part of a year. He looked at it and let it be what it was now. Just land. His land now as much as anyone's, as long as he stood on it. He turned away from the road and went inside, and the door closed behind him, and the evening came in soft and gold over Samuel Cord's ranch, and every soul on that property was exactly where they were supposed to be. Some things once earned do not have to be earned again. This was one of them, and they were never not one of them going anywhere.